Well, welcome, Tim, to the Flower Podcast. It's great to have you here today. Yay! I know. And so I was trying to think earlier today, when was the first time I met you? And maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I mean,
It's also misty, Scott.
It's like a big blur. But anyway, but I know that, and I'm sure you hear this a lot, you left a lasting impression on me. And so I wanted to make sure, you've been on my bucket list to actually interview for quite some time, and I'm glad we can work this out. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. My pleasure. And I've been looking forward to this because I feel like it's going to help a lot of people trying to, figure out how to level up in what they do. And so before we continue, I want to make sure, I want to hear your backstory. I want to hear how you got associated in the world of floristry and how that connection was made.
So picture it, New York City, 1993. Now, what happened was I literally fell into it. I grew up in Connecticut and I was educated there, and that's right next door, 50 miles away.
Sure.
And I moved to New York, and this was early 93. We were in a recession. So jobs were hard to be found. And I have a degree in marketing. So old school, looking through the newspaper, I saw an ad, customer service, and it said, answer the phones in a flower shop. And I figured, trained monkey can do this. I'm like, come on, really? So I went in and I interviewed and I got the job. And this was literally 2 weeks before Mother's Day. It was April 23rd, 1993. So I got hired. I was kind of getting settled. And I asked one of my coworkers, I said, oh, so like, what's Mother's Day like? Is it going to be busy? And they're like, no, not at all. It's like, okay.
Baptism by fire.
So I literally went from like 0 to 3,000 overnight because the store where I worked, it was called Surroundings. It was the flower shop of the moment in New York City. So everybody who had went to work by helicopter called us. Everybody who was in media called us. Everybody who was in entertainment called us. And it wasn't uncommon for me. It was in a brownstone. It was on 79th and Broadway, really, really affluent part of the city, wonderful neighborhood. But it wasn't uncommon for me to walk down onto the ground floor of the store and bump into Lauren Bacall, Cyndi Lauper, Jane Pauley, Diane Wiest lived next door to us. So there were tons of celebrities who were not just calling, but coming in. So what happened was I was hired to do sales because back in the day before internet, flower shops were a lot more segregated. So you answered the phone and you waited on customers, or you design, and kind of like the designers were kept in this little bubble. They didn't interact with customers for the most part, and we answered the phones. So that's what I did. And it was awesome. I had a great time. I worked my butt off. I was there for 4 years and I learned everything. So I was never trained on design. While I was there, I think what I learned was to appreciate good design. I can spot fugly 3 city blocks away. And I learned an appreciation for flowers for sure. What happened was after about the 4th year, I felt like it was a little bit of Groundhog's Day, kind of in the sense that I knew I wasn't going to go further up the food chain. I didn't want to be the manager. The managers end up usually being hospitalized from stress. Didn't want that.
Right.
So I thought, okay, I'm going to use I decided what I'm going to do is tap into what I went to school for, which was marketing. I took a job as the marketing director for a furniture company. And I had this really cool office on the 13th or 14th floor of a building on 5th Avenue. But I thought, now I've got all this really specific industry knowledge that's just going to be wasted. So I was walking through the flower market and I saw the delivery van and I said, can you give me a ride to the store? Sat down, talked to the owner, went back to work for them, just for a short while. And then with the owner's blessing, I kind of packaged what I learned from them. And I say that the math is a combination of best practices from the store where I worked,
Mm-hmm.
my degree in marketing, a little bit of common sense, and then also my perspective or my wants and needs as a consumer. So I put that all together and I launched my company, which is Floral Strategies. And that was in the summer of 1997. And I launched it because I felt like I was meeting the proverbial unfulfilled need. There was nobody in the industry who was solely focused on teaching business acumen, business skills, best business practices to the industry. It's all about design, which of course is awesome, but if you can't sell it well, if you don't market it well, if your cost of goods are rampant out of control, you know, what's the point? So that was kind of the impetus for me to start the business. And that was back in the summer of 1997. And I remain the only person on the planet with my job. Which
wow,
is kind
talk
of
about job security.
Yeah, 9 billion people, and that's it.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think that is?
Because back then, and even still now, the industry is focused on design and pretty and that's great and that's wonderful. But again, when it comes to the business part of it, it's like kryptonite. People go running like they don't want to hear about it. And what I've been working on, I have a couple of labs working on, is trying to insert the greedy gene into more florists. Florists aren't greedy enough. And, greedy is not bad, but literally and seriously, I talk to florists who will say, no, I'm making enough money, or I just love working with flowers. So, what do you do with that? But
let me jump in here real quick. So you say that, and of course, having known what you do and having been through one of your seminars, I know exactly what you're talking about. But for people who don't know who you are, you really, in Floral Strategies, you break down, I'm gonna let you explain it. What does your company do to kind of help the florist then? Splicing greedy genes, or how do you put it?
That's my pet project.
Okay.
So let me back up again and just a little bit further of my origin story. When I worked at the store, part of what my job was to call out our orders. And going back, so this is 1994, 95, 96, our average sale was about $150. So that's nearly 30 years ago. So, adjusted for inflation, those are huge numbers. So obviously, as you can imagine, when somebody is placing that kind of money on an order being delivered out of town, they don't want a blue carnation poodle. They want to know that they're going to get, gorgeous flowers. So a big part of my job was actually, calling out and talking to florists all the time. So I made lots of connections, and one of my connections was with somebody who was kind of running customer service at Winston Flowers. With, for anybody who doesn't know, Winston Flowers is, I don't know, what would you say, one of the top 5 iconic brands in the country. They do millions and millions. I don't know, but I'm going to guesstimate well north of $30 or $40 million a year.
Crazy.
They're in Boston. They've kind of been inching their way down to the city, and kind of circle of life moment. They actually ended up buying the flower shop where I learned the business.
Wow.
Yeah, about maybe 3 or 4 years ago. So it became part of the Winston family. Anyway, the point is simply that I went in there, and it was daunting because I literally was kind of, crossing my fingers behind my back that nobody would, figure me out as either being not a fake, but just, that I was literally beta testing on them. But I went in, did what I do, and the owner looked at the numbers like before and after, and he offered me a job. He said, do you want to come to work for us? Do you want to be head of sales? And I teetered on it for a moment. I said, no, thank you, but no. But because we moved the needle so much at his organization, literally he got on the phone with like 3 phone calls. I was darting all over the country. And it's been kind of a trickle down effect since. But to your question, what is it that I teach? I would say on the most basic practical level, I teach the one skill that the industry doesn't have, and that is how to listen. And I know that sounds kind of pedantic and moronic and maybe overly simple, but people don't listen in flower shops. What they do is they hear customers. So the customer calls and they say to the person on the other end of the phone, "Oh, it's my mom's birthday." So what they hear is, "Oh, it's a birthday, and I'm going to offer that $49.99 basket of pastel side of the rhodia in the cooler, and maybe if they're lucky, I'm going to offer them a balloon." But what they don't listen to, for example, is that maybe it's his mom's 60th birthday, that maybe he's calling from out of town and he can't be there, that maybe on the card message, they're alluding to her big brood of children and grandchildren and great grandchildren, that if you are kind of like mentally like moving the beads on your abacus, you realize, all right, this should be a big fat sweaty sale. And what it comes down to is, nothing venture, nothing gain. So if nobody ever offers the customer that bigger price point, they're not going to buy it. So what I do, like where I kind of connect the dots, if you will, is I help people to listen. I help people, whether they are in downtown Atlanta or some little podunk town and, wherever, to connect with the customer, offer a higher price point, and they buy it. They do. And it means millions and millions and millions of dollars a year that florists make using this process.
Well, I kind of feel like when I sat there and I'm listening to this technique that you teach, that so many times I can just watch people's body language and watch them cringe or watch them, like this is such an uncomfortable area. And I don't always understand why, but I know it's true. And you hinted at it already that, well, I make enough money because,
right.
I enjoy working with flowers. And I feel like and so many times floristry is one of those professions, and I can't actually now that I think about it, I can't think of any other profession where we almost apologize for charging what we charge.
We're the only industry in the world that literally apologizes for being in business. Can you imagine that? A dentist saying, "Oh, I'm really sorry that I'm going to charge you that much to fix a cavity," or the optometrist saying, "I'm really sorry, I'm going to have to charge you that much to give you 20/20 vision." But yes, we actually apologize for being in business. How is that a recipe for sustainable growth?
Well, it's not. And the thing about it is I know earlier you were joking about the whole greed gene. And I feel like a lot of times that's sort of a mindset that a lot of people have. And where either they just started their business or they don't feel confident. They just have this mindset where they can't seem to level up. And I feel like, one of the things I remember most is you helping people see that sometimes we leave money on the table because we're afraid to ask, whether it's a wedding, whether it's a retail customer calling in. It doesn't matter what it is in floristry. It could be a flower farmer for that matter. And, I spent 4 months growing this crop and now I'm afraid to ask what it's really worth.
Mm-hmm.
And so it doesn't matter where you are in the chain, in the supply chain. It's a chronic issue that I'm kind of hoping that you can help give people some confidence today to kind of maybe change their mindset, shift it in a way where they can approach these things and feel good about it. Not just feel like dirty, but feel good about it.
Well, so here's my take on it. And it always rings true that when you are listening, and again, I'm almost pedantic about differentiating between hearing and listening. Again, hearing is kind of almost just our physical reaction to the sounds that a customer emits, versus listening is where we are understanding, we're engaging, and we have a better grasp of what the customer really needs. So here's my kind of snarky take on it. That when it's appropriate, when you offer a customer a larger design at a higher price point, it's bitch insurance. Simply put, the more the spend, the less they bitch. No one has ever called the store and said, damn it, that arrangement was too big and too beautiful. Come and pick it up. It ain't never going to happen. But sadly, the contrary does. And what happens, Scott, is customers, and hopefully this will make some people listening to the podcast cringe because they've heard it. A customer will call and say, I got to tell you, I saw the flowers. They were pretty. They smelled great. They arrived on time, but I was just a little disappointed. I was a little underwhelmed. It was so small. Wait for it. If somebody just told me I needed to spend more money, I would have. And that's what it comes from, because it is literally every nasty bad habit that haunts the floral industry solidified into that one moment. The person who took the order wasn't listening. The person who took the order was afraid of rejection. The person who took the order was selling from his or her own pocket. And all of that kind of conspired in this like perfect storm that resulted in the customer who was ready, willing, and able. That's the irony. Ready, willing, and able to spend more. But because they weren't allowed to, they didn't. And now they're complaining. Adding to that, this is a fact that I kind of share this all the time, but it's been around forever, and you can see it anytime you read at all about customer service, and that is that 68% of customers don't complain. They don't go back.
Right.
So theoretically,
I bet in the South it's even worse.
It might be.
Just because, I mean, that's one thing we used to hear all the time. The people just don't take the time to even respond and come back.
Right. So the customer who got that beautiful arrangement delivered to his wife, and again, smelled great and was beautiful and looked perfect. But if it was a $75 one and he really needed or expected a $125 one, he's just going to mentally write it off and say, I'll just call somebody else next time. Or God forbid, I'll send her the pre-cut fruit dipped in chocolate.
Yeah, I have to agree with that. Okay. Well, so let me ask this question. I know I always, and I wish we could do it here, but obviously because of the way we're recording, we can't. But I always love when I've heard you and seen you do the thing where you like call a flower shop and you just sort of spontaneously call someone and just kind of prove your point. And I think we can all, I don't think we need to do that because I think we all can imagine this for sure. What is the thing that when you're having these conversations with your clients that really moves the needle? What is the thing that is all of a sudden, the light bulb goes off. They're like, oh, well, that's easy. I mean, this is not as difficult as I'm making it. Does that make sense?
It does, but I would back up and I would say, unfortunately, I usually need like industrial strength arc lighting, not just a light bulb to make the point.
Okay.
Because I don't know if I could point a finger to one segment of the industry or one entity, but as a broad stroke, we really settle for crappy, mediocre service, and we think it's good. We think it's good to ask customers insane questions like, how much do you want to spend? What do you want to send? The bar is so incredibly low in our industry, yet we wonder why we're eating ourselves alive. I don't know the statistics, and so I don't want to quote exact numbers, but what I do know is that there are fewer than half as many retail florists in the country now as there were when I started. And 30 years later, our population has grown. There are millions more people living. So theoretically, there should be that many more florists, but there are that many fewer. And that's by and large because of these horrible business practices. So to your point, I find that when I'm talking to a flower shop, there's this kind of wall that they throw up, like, oh, customers love our staff, customers love us, we don't need customer service training. I'm saying I don't refute that, and that's awesome. I can't teach nice. If your staff is nice, that's that's a gift from above. I can't teach them to be nice. However, here is the problem, that there are all of these bad habits that I've gone as far away as Australia, and people are still saying the same stuff. So it's just, it's global. But what happens is, when I'm having a conversation, if I were talking to you as a prospective flower shop owner, and you maybe said to me, hey, I've heard, good things about you, what is it that you do? How do you help us? I say, you know what? Let me just start with some empirical evidence. And that is, you go onto your commercial website, so your flower shop e-commerce website, and inevitably, invariably, the average amount that a customer spends for a delivery order on the website is 25% higher than if that customer were to call the store or visit the store. You know why that is?
I yeah, because there's not a person getting in the way, probably. But
you're diplomatic about it. What I say, what I say instead is, because the website ain't afraid of rejection. The website isn't afraid of customers. In other words, I call the typical flower shop and I say, hey, my grandmother just died in a hot air balloon accident, and she had 39 grandchildren and 79 great-grandchildren. And inevitably, and this is kind of what you were talking about, what you heard, what I hear back is, oh, what was her name and where are the services happening? And our easel spray started at $150. But had I maybe opted, for whatever reason, to shop on that same store's website after hours, I guarantee when I go into the section for funeral sprays, I'm going to see $300, $400, $500 options. I'm going to buy those. Additionally, whether it's funeral work or daily work, when I'm going through the checkout process, the website is always going to prompt me, add that balloon, that box of chocolates, that teddy bear, that lavender scented candle. But I talk to people regularly who, oh, I don't want to seem pushy. I don't want to seem like I'm selling a customer. Why? Because you're offering them a balloon? Just for the record, never in the history of humanity has somebody said, how dare you offer me a balloon for my 7-year-old granddaughter's arrangement? Just cancel the sale, close my account. No, they're just going to say, she's not a balloon person. Nothing ventured, nothing gained. And I'm being a bit of a wise ass, but I'm not oversimplifying it. This is literally what happens, and it's all changeable.
Right. Okay, so when you're working with clients, I'm just curious, especially since there's this trend with shops, having half as many shops as there were 30 years ago or however long ago. And you would think that you'd have people knocking down your door. And so is that something, are people receptive to, like, when someone from your team calls and they're trying to, solicit that service where you're coaching them and you can help improve their sales, do they embrace it, or is it still something that people just, well, I guess you said it already, where people still think they've got all the answers?
Well, there are two levels to it. So the first level, it's a two-level sale. The first conversation is about what we do. And even though, when I tell people we've been doing this for 23 years and we're, a global entity, there's still that it's, I guess because it's intellectual property, it's not something tangible that you can pull off the shelf. So we have to first sell them about what we do, and then we have to sell them on the fact that they need it. And it is what I say to my team when they're having a pity party is I remind them there's a reason that we're the only people in the world who do what we do. If it were so easy to sell education to florists, we'd have competition, but we don't. But that in itself would make you think that people, yes, would be banging down my door. But again, florists are a hardworking group. Many of them are motivated by their passion for design and their creative side. And a lot of them are, very, very quick to say, I'm a creative person. I'm not a business person. So they kind of put that out as a disclaimer. And, that's where my process falls. And to that point, I'm always trying to understand how they think better. And the primary course that we teach, it's called, and this is a rebranding we did about 2 or 3 years ago, it's literally called the Floral Confidence Workshop. So it's not sales training 101, which of course makes people, go running for the hills. It's literally called the Floral Confidence Workshop. So yes, it's still a challenge, but that's what keeps me young. So.
Well, one of the things I remember, and maybe we can just give some, I mean, I realize that when you do what you do, the magic you work with your clients is a process, and it's way more involved than we can get into here. But I think back to, some of the things I thought of that was really key, and that is where, like a website, you coach people on giving, maybe price points, like giving them choices. And I'm curious if you would mind walking through that process of what words do avoid. And I wish I could remember there was one word that you kept saying, like, don't ever say this word, and I can't remember.
Sorry, I'm having problems with my mic. I don't. So yeah, I can give you some of the secret sauce.
Okay.
Again, getting back to the idea of, getting back to the idea of listening, and I'll take a couple slices out of the Floral Confidence Workshop. So one of the exercises that we do early on is I will say to them, okay, imagine that I'm the customer and I'm calling you and I'm telling you, just found out that my first cousin passed away unexpectedly in a car accident. And I'm devastated because we were raised like brothers. Unfortunately, I can't come home to insert your town here. And I'm calling from, and I usually will, depending on where the store is, throw it to the other coast or just like thousands of miles or kilometers away. I go on to say, I really don't know what to send. I haven't been on your website. My wife mentioned something about an easel spray. How much do those cost? What do you think 99% of the flower shops that I take through the program, how do you think they answer, Scott? You don't have to give me the dollar amount, but what do you think the structure of their response is?
Well, I think you hinted at it earlier. It's well, how much do you want to spend? I mean, I think that's what most people say.
No, they don't ask that, thankfully. But what they'll do is that they will say, our easel sprays start at.
Okay.
So I say there's the problem. Like that one moment is why the floral industry is literally dying, no pun intended, because they're not listening to the customer. They're hearing, it's an inquiry about an easel spray, so they spit out, they start at 150, but they're not listening. And here's my point. So I say, okay, let's take a step back and let's kind of like grind this down. First of all, what the customer said was, hey, I was about to jump on a flight and spend $300, $400, $500 to come from A to B. Next, the person who died was a cousin, but I considered him a brother. So that raises the bar by a factor of 10. Next, what the customer asked very succinctly was, how much do they cost? In other words, like customers do all the time, I'm giving you this whole backstory. I'm giving you all these reasons. So what I'm saying to you as the person I perceive as the professional, in light of everything I've told you, how much should I be spending on this easel spray? So that's where, and I'm just going to use kind of general math. I might come back and say, the customer should be offered a $300 to $500 easel spray. And I can like hear everybody in the background like pass out. I'm like, can somebody get an EpiPen? And they're like, oh my gosh, we've never sold a $500 easel spray. I said, guess why? I don't know. Because you never offered a $500 easel spray. We go on to talk about the fact that realistically, what's the worst case scenario? Worst case scenario is the customer's going to say, I don't want to spend that much. So they go from 500 to 300. That's still double starting somebody at 150. So right. That's a huge difference. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. But yes, to your point, you are right. I can't undo years and years of bad habits with just a 15-minute pep talk. We literally take them through mantras. I've got 6 mantras that I teach them, and we constantly refer to, and I'll explain after we do a sales scenario. I'll say like this sale worked well because the salesperson invoke this mantra and that mantra, or this sale took so much longer and resulted in a lower price point because they broke this mantra and they didn't obey this mantra. So it definitely is some psychology. But, thankfully, I train people sometimes who have been, working at the same shop since 1830, and they still can they have that aha moment, like, oh yeah, you're right. It is easier and quicker if we do it this way. So.
Well, and it helps you streamline everything. I mean, because you can apply the, I mean, you said a spray, but you could do this for any size arrangement. I mean, you can do this, for a wedding even. I mean, if you're doing a wedding flower, it's the same type of thing. If you hear, I know, my mother-in-law used to sell weddings, and she would always ask all these questions about, well, where are you having it, and are you having band, or what kind of music are you having, and and it's sit down. I mean, she would ask all these questions leading up to the doing the proposal, because that let her know how significant of an event is this really going to be when it comes time to price things, or to sell whatever. And I feel like that's kind of, when you're talking this distinction between listening and hearing, that's exactly what you're talking about. And it's so it's important to tune into that. And and I'm glad you've mentioned it now a couple times, just because I feel like even with a podcast, we're all, what are we hearing, or are we listening to really the meat of what you're saying, and how this one thing can revolutionize the bottom line. I mean, that's what we're talking about here. Jobs and profitability and overhead, and, as you said earlier too, sustainability.
There are two other silver linings. One is, well, to back up for a minute, just kind of add to my story a little bit. When I began Floral Strategies, the model back then was, I'm going to come to you. So not only am I going to teach you these incredible best practices, but I'm literally going to do it in the comfort of your store, because there are fewer and fewer trade shows to attend, and it's costly to close your store for the day. You're gonna either go and fly your staff or drive your staff, pay for hotels. It adds up very, very quickly. So my thought was, let me remove that obstacle, and I'm going to come to your store. So I've been really, really blessed. I've visited all 50 states. Very few Americans can say that. I've been all over Canada. I regularly go to England and train in Ireland and Scotland and Wales. I've been, as I mentioned earlier, to Australia. And that gives me a unique perspective. About 2 years ago, give or take, I decided enough is enough. I'm going to move to a webinar model. I felt like the industry was at a point of what I call technical maturity.
Right.
That everyone is producing a webinar. COVID has kind of, turbocharged that. But, you see your children or your grandchildren learning on Zoom. So it's taking some of the mystique out of it. Mm-hmm. So about 2 years ago, I moved to that model. I still travel, but basically what I've done is I've taken like New York City and drawn like a 150-mile circle around it. So if I can day trip to you, I will. And once, probably starting next year, I'll get back into the groove of traveling a little bit more. But my point is that obviously there's still these big pockets during the year when I can't do the training. Nobody wants to hear from me Mother's Day, Valentine's Day, Thanksgiving, Christmas. So instead of sitting home like a normal person and binging on Netflix, what I do instead is I go and I work at a store. And I bounce around, but typically, or of late, I've been spending a lot of my time with the biggest flower shop in the state of New Mexico, one of my very first customers, stretching way back to the 90s. So I go there and I become you. I am the flower shop worker. I'm answering the phones. I'm waiting on customers, helping with deliveries. I'm just kind of getting down and dirty. And what that does is it keeps me honest, because it helps me to understand how customers' shopping patterns and needs and expectations are continually evolving. and it gives me a chance to fine tune this process. But part of the reason I bring this up is when I'm waiting on customers on the phone, the constant compliment that I get, and people hear this who go through the program as well, is at the end of the call, people will say to me, "What was your name again?" I'll say, "Tim." "Tim, thank you so much. You made this so quick. You made this so easy." Meaning the customer didn't feel rushed. They didn't feel shortchanged. To the contrary, they realized like this was like this 180 where we had this like curated shopping experience where somebody did all the thinking for us and didn't bombard us with a bazillion questions. We just had to answer a few succinct questions. We had a clear understanding of what we're getting, and we're happy for it. So that to me is more validation of how well this works than even a big sale. You know, that the customer feels like, wow, I took the time to visit independent flower shop. And I know that I'm spending more money that I could have grabbed quick flowers at the grocery store or the farmer's market or hell in the parking lot at Walgreens sometimes. So that's important as well.
And I feel like by you being in those stores, I mean, you are firsthand experiencing these things, and you're proving your concept over and over and over again. I'm curious, what trends have you seen in the way people buy? Obviously, online is so huge right now because of COVID, but before COVID, I mean, were there any changes in like how people are shopping for flowers?
So when a flower shop signs up for our program, one of the things that we do preemptively is we have them fill out about a 35 question questionnaire, because I want it to be a very bespoke and curated experience. I don't want the flower shop in Appleton, Wisconsin thinking that I'm talking to them like they're in New York City and using those prices. And so it is a very tailored experience. But one of the questions that we've been asking for a long time is, how much of your business is phone versus walk-in? And years before COVID, the majority of shops said the majority of our business comes over the phone. So I think kind of hand in glove with the internet, we've been like, no, we're decades into that shift. But with every passing day, there are more and more people who get some kind of smart devices, a phone, a tablet, or whatever, and websites are better and better and better, more easily viewable on these devices. So that's kind of the trend. And people will either just opt to shop online, so you don't really know that in the flower shop unless it comes off the printer, or they'll use the website as a window into the store and you know, take a look at what you have and make a phone call. But I would say that the fundamental change is that customers will look at a flower design as being the same as, like, you know, this pot behind me. You know, this was manufactured, so the 10,000 before it and the 10,000 after are going to look exactly like that pot. Ain't nothing going to change. Whereas, you know, you open your box in the morning, you're like, oh crap, these tulips are half the size that I expected, or I ordered bright yellow roses and we got pale yellow roses. So, but it circles back to the whole idea of communicating to your customer. You have to be unafraid to let them know that. And, you know, I say all the time, you know, remember people, we're not closing the hole in the ozone. We're not saving the baby whales. We're selling flowers. And, you know, it really isn't the epic end of the world if you've got to tell somebody, I'm going to put weddings aside because that could be the end of the world. But weddings aside, for, you know, a daily order, to be able to comfortably or confidently reach out to a customer and explain that you had to make a substitution and use the right language and control that situation. It's not a big deal, and it shouldn't be a big deal. We let it become a big deal, unfortunately.
Well, and I know that I've heard that narrative before where people, you know, refer to the floral industry as, you know, it's not brain surgery, it's not that big of a deal. And I feel like in a lot of ways, I hate that. It makes me cringe because I feel like it undermines that value of what we do.
For sure, for
But
sure.
but at the same time, I think what you're speaking to is more the idea that the average person calling the flower shop is trusting your judgment to make a substitution. Don't be afraid to make the phone call in a difficult situation,
Right.
because you don't want to make more out of it than it really is.
You know,
Um,
what we're doing is 100 times more subtle and nuanced than running a dry cleaner or operating a restaurant or a bowling alley for that matter. But yes, the problem is we get ourselves worked into such a froth over something that's just, hey, Mr. Customer, it's Tim calling from the flower shop. Want to let you know the roses, I know you ordered yellow roses. The ones that came in aren't perfect. I don't love the shade, or I don't love the quality. Here is what I like to send instead. Like, why is that such a big deal? Why do you need like years of counseling to get through doing that? I don't understand.
well, I think it depends on the customer, but you're right. I mean, most people would appreciate that, I would
Of
think,
course, of course.
because you're looking after their best interests. The only time that's not so great is when that one flower is, of course, sentimental or some other
Well,
deeper meaning to it. But I think at that point, then you've approached, you're managing their expectation. You've approached the problem, and now you have an opportunity to solve it one way or the other. Maybe you wait another day, or I don't know.
well, to dip back into the floral confidence workshop, one of the elements of it is what I call the lexicon. And I literally have a list on one side of standard, archaic, just crappy language that everybody uses. And on the right hand side is where we've gussied it up a little bit. And one of the dynamics we talk about is how to say no to a customer, how to tell a customer we don't have something. So the example that I use is the customer calls and he says it's middle of July, and let's say you're in Phoenix, okay? So it's like 1 degree cooler than the sun, okay? And the customer wants to order a big vase of tulips to surprise his wife because he just remembers that she likes tulips, or she mentioned something like tulips, that she likes tulips. So I would say the majority of flower shops would say, okay, because we buy into this idea of like the customer's always right. And we know what's going to happen. First of all, they're either going to look anemic, they're going to cost a bazillion dollars, or they go and like blow up before you even get to the delivery van, and then it becomes a complaint. And then inevitably, when we go and maybe talk to the salesperson who took the order, and that person has been working there for 25 years, he or she sheepishly will say, well, that's what the customer asked for, and that's what the customer wanted. So I'm like, no, we need to do like a floral timeout. So what I say in that situation, because we all hear it all the time, is I would go back to the customer and I would commend him for his choice. I say, tulips are a great flower. In good faith, I want to let you know that I can order them. It's not the best time of the year for them, or they're super, super sensitive to the heat. So unless there's a sentimental or symbolic reason to your choice, I would recommend this, or I would suggest that. And if there were some type of really heavy duty symbolic reason, I would say, well, let's get other garden flowers, maybe sturdier ones, hardier ones, and maybe incorporate just a couple safely in the middle. Why is that so difficult?
Yeah, it's not. And I think in the end, it's more difficult to have to eat the tulip arrangement. And then
Exactly.
you're going to end up sending another arrangement or another design again. And at that point, you just think, okay, what is more difficult? I mean, it's common sense at some point.
Well, I look back and I realized I was very, very lucky in so much that when I worked at Surroundings, there were 3 of us on the phones, and those phones raged all day long from when we were open to when we closed. So here's what would happen. And I'm a pretty quick learner, I like to think, and this happened in the early days of my career. So hypothetically, I would take an order on a Tuesday, and maybe what the customer said she wanted to spend, I knew was probably a little short. Maybe she needed to spend a little more, but I bought into that adage of, oh, the customer's always right. We have to give the customer whatever they want. So what would happen is The flowers would go out, they would get delivered. The customer would see them, either they were delivered to her or she saw where they were delivered. And she would call back, maybe to place another order, just to let me know, hey, Tim, you know what? Saw the flowers. I was a little disappointed, a little underwhelmed. I wish you had told me that they were only to be that size, or I wish you told me that I need to spend more money. I would have. So I had like that aha moment. I realized rather than have this awkward conversation afterwards, I just need to put my big boy pants on and say to somebody, for example, I know that you said you wanted to stay with a $100 budget. What you're describing, what you're anticipating, particularly those flowers that you mentioned, really necessitate what we would consider, a large design closer to 150. Of course, I can work with your budget and send you a smaller design. So in other words, by the time that customer hung up, she would either adjust her expectation or adjust her budget. So regardless of where she went, in other words, increasing her budget or sticking where she was, what we delivered to her would be in sync with what she was expecting. And that's the recipe for like amazing customer service.
Right. And repeat customers. And
absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. I love that. Well, I'm just curious, with all the things your company does, what is the most popular course that you offer?
So it undoubtedly is our Floral Confidence Workshop, because that's kind of like the bread and butter of what I learned and what I teach and what I use. But we tweak that all the time. I would say on average, I teach it about 15 times a week. It's a 3-hour course, but I'm always scribbling notes and I'm talking to my team, just because, to our earlier conversation, customers' expectations, customer shopping patterns, those are always evolving. So we do a complete overhaul of that once a year. And for a long time, I didn't want to get involved with design, just because, as I said in the beginning, I was never trained as a designer. I don't have all the letters after my name. I figured I'm going to leave that to the experts. However, what I realized was that design wasn't being taught the way it needed to be taught for maximum impact. I don't want to step on toes, and you and I were even chatting beforehand about some of the people you've interviewed already who I know, some people with amazing flower schools where I've had the privilege to teach my little business component. But here's what we devised, an ancillary product called Design Strategies, where essentially we send a really qualified, really talented designer on site to kind of work one-on-one with the team. So it's almost the design version of what we do in sales. So we're saying, hey, in the comfort of your store, we're going to work with you. We're going to understand or help you to improve your design skills. We're going to give you tools and tricks and tips to give you new efficiencies, new productivity. Take a critical look, even like at, how often are you making a trip to the cooler? Are you going to the cooler 379 times for every order? Those are all the things that we make an assessment on. And that probably is about 15% of our business. But it's been a runaway hit. It's not cheap, because, as you can imagine, sending a qualified designer on site, but everybody who does it loves it. So that's where we've kind of dipped our toe, if you will, in the waters of design education. And I'm very lucky that Jackie Lacey, who is the president of AIFD, is a personal friend, and he's been on some webinars with us. So that's where I'm very quick to say, hey, this is where my expertise ends. Let's bring in somebody who knows this better. So that's why we have a pretty eclectic range of webinars that we've produced. We've talked about staff management, hiring and firing, dealing with difficult staff, marketing and advertising. So we definitely cover the business spectrum. But the bread and butter, the thing that I love teaching the most is helping people to, in the course of just a few short hours, awaken to the realization that they've got the confidence, they've got the verbal tools, they've got the skill set to dramatically increase their sales. And I get calls constantly from flower shops who will say, like, hot darn, we are in a town of 5,000 people. Like I went to grammar school with, I know everyone who comes in the store, yet they will spend a ton more money, and we're just stupefied.
That's incredible. I know with this year being such a weird year, and now we're approaching Thanksgiving. I'm not sure exactly when this episode will air, but it's going to be really close to that. Obviously, the next major flower holiday. I mean, Christmas is huge, but I think of Valentine's Day. Do you have like things that are geared towards holidays, or how does that work? Being that they're so different. I mean, business is business, but holidays, does that make a difference at all?
It does, and it's kind of interesting. There's a certain predictability in our industry. We know Valentine's Day is going to be crazy. We know Mother's Day is going to be crazy. And obviously, yes, this year, shook things up in a very good way. Most of the flower shops I work with said they had an Easter like it was in the 1990s, and it just went crazy. But one of the webinars that we produce is called Valentine's Boot Camp, and it's my favorite. And on paper, you might think, okay, well, it's Valentine's Day. It's the 14th. We are going to be, hating the general public until the wee hours of the 13th, and we're, up to our eyeballs in red rose petals. Like, what changes? But a lot changes. Obviously, the wild card with Valentine's Day is the day of the week in which it lands.
Right.
But there's a lot going on. So about 10 years ago, no, exactly 10 years ago in 2011, we launched in January what we call Valentine Boot Camp. And it's been a crazy runaway hit. And what we do, it changes every year, but we give shops best practices. We give them even a timeline. We count down with them what you need to do every week. And because of the number of shops that I work with, I'm privy to a lot of cool things that other flower shops are doing. For example, there's a store in London a couple of years ago who just kind of turned up their nose at red. They said, we're over it. Red is so last year. And they made purple the new red. And obviously, you're not going to pull that off in, I don't know, Bloomington, Indiana, and not alienate your customers. But there's no reason that you can't try it or do a little bit of it. So that's what we bring into it, and it's a lot of fun. We have guest designers. It's kind of like a big rah session to get people pumped up for this first big holiday of the new year, and we have a lot of fun with it.
That's awesome. I'm just curious now, how did that go over? Because you said it was in England, so how did it go over there?
It was in London. Like in any big city, you can get super stratified and pull that off because you're gonna have a niche market that loves you regardless of what you do. I'll send you a link. It was gorgeous. I love what they created. I think it's daring to be honest. I know that holiday in particular, brings men out of the woodwork that haven't ordered since last Valentine's Day. And we're kind of programmed that we think, oh, we're gonna order what we saw our dads do and our granddads do. And it's that iconic, I call it a commodity really at this point, because everybody knows what a dozen roses is with some kind of accent flower and greenery looks like. It hasn't changed in 100 years. You look at old time pictures of, a flower shop in 1920, there sits that dozen roses with baby's breath. So
that's fine.
But let me just get this in. At the same time, I think kind of a continual outcry from the industry is, the grocery stores are beating us up. Yeah, they're selling a commodity that's kind of plain and boring. So don't worry about competing with them on price. Make your dozen roses a lot more interesting. So bring it full circle. I guess maybe even if you are in Bloomington, Indiana, or anywhere else in the country, why not let your customers see something they're not going to see at the grocery store or another flower shop for that matter?
Well, I'm really glad you brought that up because I hadn't thought to bring that up today. But, that's one of the big things I heard over years and years and years, the impact of the box stores on the local florist. What do you tell people when they start complaining about that, or they start, that's some of the smoke and mirrors they throw your way? How do you tell them to overcome that? Just simply, I mean, I know we can't get into it all.
No, my response is very simple. Get over it. Like, who gives a crap? Like, I don't give a crap, because it's a David and Goliath dynamic. And when a customer, or for that matter, even a florist, starts to make a comparison, how can you? You know, so I won't name names, but I've worked with some of them, and some of these grocery store chains here in North America, they do billions, billions and billions and billions of dollars a year. How are they going to compete with your mom and pop flower shop in a strip mall in, northeastern Florida? They're not. But again, it's that kind of, I don't want to say defeatist attitude, but just sometimes that underdog mentality that permeates our thinking in a flower shop, and then causes us to figure, oh, I can't compete with them. You don't want to. Who wants to compete with them? You're not going to compete with them. I'll tell you this. I'll give you another sliver out of our floral confidence workshop, that inevitably the customer is going to make a snarky comment about prices, and it's really kind of heightened at Valentine's Day. So when the customer says to me, oh my gosh, these prices are, these are ridiculous. I saw the same roses at, insert here, big box store here, big box grocery store, whatever, for half the price. I'm not going to get into histrionics with the customer. I'm not going to give him this big elaborate story. What I say to him, cool as a cucumber, is this: sir, I have no idea of the quality or the age of the roses that anybody else is selling, but here at Scott's Flowers, we pride ourselves on the gorgeous flowers that we're working with, the expert design that we apply, the way they're beautifully gift wrapped, hand delivered, and that's why we charge what we charge. So in other words, what I'm saying to a customer, kind of a left-hand way, is like, this isn't Bed Bath & Beyond. I'm not going to whip out a 20% off coupon just because you have your knickers in a twist.
Right.
So,
right.
But that's the mentality we have to adopt if we're going to survive.
Yeah, I agree. And there's no reason to fight over that dime. I mean, seriously, because you see what they produce and at the level they produce it. And it's like, it's you can't win, like you said. And I appreciate you saying that. I always like to end our episodes with, going into advice. And of course, you've given lots of advice, but I'm just curious, what is something that has really, something that you feel like will help a lot of people?
Well, I can be very self-serving and say invest in education, because that's gonna help everybody and help to keep my team afloat for the next 23 years. But what I would say is to don't be obsessed with what your competition is doing. Just work at making your business the best that it is. We don't need cookie cutter versions of each other. I also will say that COVID has been a really interesting moment. It's caused the industry to take a look at kind of what we've been doing on autopilot for years and kind of shake things up. Sadly, we lost flower shops from this, but many flower shops got stronger. And one of the things that I thought was very interesting is so many flower shops had no choice at Mother's Day but to offer a really scaled back lineup, because they had fewer staff, so they couldn't be pumping out 39 different designs. There were, and we still have issues with the supply chain. So if they were going to remain viable, they kind of had to say, okay, instead of this 79 SKUs that we have on our website, we're going to skinny it down to 6. And they kind of held their breath. But interestingly, because almost by default, they started using some of my principles by flipping it and saying, hey, this is what we have, this is what we can offer you, customers bought it. And I think many, many flower shops walked away from that realizing, maybe we don't need to have all these fancy special containers. Maybe we don't need to have 79 options for Christmas. And that is helping to cut down on inventory. That's helping to streamline their buying. It's helping to diminish their waste. It's helping their profitability. So, if we want to be so bold as to say that there's a silver lining to COVID, I think it's taught the industry a really valuable lesson.
And you said that, it made me think of restaurants. I think, obviously they don't have everything under the sun in that refrigerator in the back for that chef to prepare, to
right.
create. And it's like, no, they had, especially the higher end the restaurant, usually the smaller the offerings are.
Mm-hmm.
And it's because that way you're getting the freshest, the best of whatever it is at that moment in that season. And it's prepared in a way that you know that you're going to have a great experience. And why can't flowers be the same way? I mean, it
Well, they
makes
can.
perfect sense. Yeah,
They can.
absolutely.
Yeah, they absolutely can. So,
Yeah. Well, Tim, thank you so much for being on the Flower Podcast this week.
well, I'm privileged and honored, and I look forward to talking to you in the future.